Nurse Emily Harris walked briskly down the dimly lit corridor of St. Mary's Hospital, her footsteps echoing off the sterile white tiles. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. She was used to the night shift's lonely quiet, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she had been assigned to cover the abandoned wing. "Good luck, Emily," her colleague John had said with a nervous chuckle. "You'll need it in that place." Emily had laughed it off, but as she approached the entrance to the old wing, she felt a shiver run down her spine. The door was heavy, made of solid wood, and creaked loudly as she pushed it open. She stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing a long, deserted hallway. The abandoned wing had been closed off for years, ever since a series of mysterious deaths had plagued the hospital. The staff rarely spoke about it, and those who did referred to it only in hushed tones, as if fearing the very mention would summon the spirits of the past. Emily's footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of antiseptic lingered, mingling with something more pungent and decayed. She glanced at her watch. 11:45 p.m. The night had only just begun. Her first task was to check the equipment and make sure everything was in order. She moved from room to room, inspecting the ancient beds and rusting medical instruments. Most of the rooms were empty, their contents long since removed or covered with white sheets that billowed like ghosts in the drafty air. In the corner of one room, she noticed an old wheelchair, its wheels caked with grime. It looked as if it hadn't been moved in decades. As she turned to leave, she heard a faint whisper, barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. "Help me." Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She swung the flashlight around, but the beam revealed nothing but empty space. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease creeping up her spine. It was just her imagination, she told herself. The stories and superstitions were getting to her. She continued her rounds, but the sense of being watched persisted. Shadows seemed to stretch and shift unnaturally, and she kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye. Each time she turned to look, she found nothing. At the end of the hallway, she came to a pair of heavy double doors marked Intensive Care Unit. They were slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through the crack. Emily hesitated, then pushed them open. The ICU was even more decrepit than the rest of the wing. Broken monitors and overturned beds cluttered the space, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. As she stepped inside, her flashlight flickered and then died, plunging her into darkness. Emily cursed under her breath and fumbled for her spare batteries. In the pitch-black silence, she heard the whisper again, louder this time. "Help me, please." Her hands trembled as she replaced the batteries and switched the flashlight back on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a figure standing at the far end of the room. It was a young girl in a hospital gown, her hair matted and her eyes wide with fear. Emily's heart pounded as she took a cautious step forward. "Hello? Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond. She simply stared at Emily, her eyes pleading. Then, as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished, leaving behind only the echo of her desperate whisper. Emily stood there, her mind racing. She had heard the stories, but she had never believed them until now. Something was very wrong in the abandoned wing, and she was determined to find out what it was, no matter the cost. Emily couldn't shake the image of the young girl from her mind. As she continued her rounds, the hospital's oppressive silence weighed heavily on her. Each creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind seemed amplified in the eerie stillness. She found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the ghostly figure following her. The old ICU was the worst part of the wing, but there were other rooms to check. Emily moved with purpose, hoping to distract herself from the gnawing fear building inside her. She entered an old supply closet, its shelves lined with dusty, forgotten medical supplies. As she inspected the room, she heard faint, almost imperceptible whispers. "Help us. We're trapped." Emily spun around, her flashlight sweeping the small space. The whispers ceased, leaving her in oppressive silence once again. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the fear gnawing at her resolve. It had to be her mind playing tricks on her. She was alone in the abandoned wing. She had to be. She left the supply closet and made her way to the nurse's station. The desk was covered in a thick layer of dust, and old charts and papers were scattered about. She picked up a worn-out logbook, its pages yellowed with age. Flipping through it, she found entries dating back to the 1960s. The names and ailments of long-dead patients filled the pages, their stories forgotten and neglected. As she read, a sudden chill washed over her, and she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She looked up and saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway. The figure was indistinct, more like a dense fog than a person, but it exuded an aura of sorrow and pain. "Who's there?" Emily called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. It simply hovered there, its shape shifting slightly. Then, as Emily took a step toward it, the figure dissolved into the darkness, leaving behind a lingering coldness that seeped into her bones. Emily's heart raced. She had never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, but the experiences of the night were pushing her skepticism to its limits. She needed answers. She decided to take a break and retreated to the small break room near the entrance of the wing. The room was just as desolate as the rest of the place, with a small table and a couple of chairs. She sat down, her mind racing with thoughts of the whispers and apparitions. As she sipped from a lukewarm bottle of water she had brought with her, Emily heard faint cries echoing through the corridors. The cries were distant, filled with anguish and desperation. They seemed to come from all around her, as if the walls themselves were mourning. "Please, help us." The voices grew louder, more insistent. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She stood up, clutching her flashlight tightly, and stepped back into the hallway. The cries seemed to guide her, pulling her toward the heart of the abandoned wing. With each step, the air grew colder, and the whispers more distinct. She reached a set of double doors marked "Surgery" and paused. The cries were louder here, almost deafening. Steeling herself, she pushed the doors open and entered the old operating room. The sight that greeted her was horrifying. The room was filled with ghostly figures, their forms translucent and shimmering. There were patients, doctors, and nurses, all trapped in a spectral replay of their final moments. The air was thick with their pain and suffering, an overwhelming tide of grief and despair. Emily stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The figures turned toward her, their eyes filled with desperation. One spirit, a man in a hospital gown, stepped forward and reached out a hand. "Help us. Please," he pleaded, his voice echoing with countless others. Emily's mind raced. How could she help them? What did they need? She felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but she couldn't abandon them. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stay calm. "I want to help," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "But I don't know how." The spirit seemed to sense her sincerity. The man's ghostly form pointed to a door at the far end of the room. "The doctor. Find the doctor." Emily nodded, understanding that the key to freeing these trapped souls lay in uncovering the truth about the mysterious deaths and the doctor responsible. With renewed determination, she left the operating room, ready to delve deeper into the hospital's dark history. As she walked away, the whispers of gratitude and hope followed her, mingling with the ever-present cries for help. The haunted hospital had revealed its secrets, and Emily was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Emily's determination to uncover the truth about the abandoned wing's dark history fueled her as she navigated the hospital's eerie corridors. The whispers had subsided, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed in on her from all sides. She felt the weight of countless unseen eyes watching her, their presence as palpable as the chill in the air. She approached a room labeled Pediatrics, the paint on the sign peeling and faded. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with dusty, forgotten toys and small, empty beds. A sense of sorrow hung in the air, a reminder of the young lives that had once filled this space with laughter and innocence. As she stepped inside, Emily's flashlight flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. She fumbled for her spare batteries, her hands trembling with a mixture of fear and frustration. Before she could replace them, a soft, childlike giggle echoed through the room. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The giggle came again, closer this time. Emily's pulse quickened as she strained to see in the darkness. Her fingers finally found the batteries, and she hurriedly replaced them, casting the beam of light around the room. In the corner, she saw the ghostly figure of a young girl, the same one she had seen in the ICU. The girl's hospital gown was tattered, and her hair hung in limp, tangled strands. She stared at Emily with wide, sorrowful eyes. "Hello?" Emily said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl didn't respond. Instead, she pointed to a small, dusty book on a nearby shelf. Emily approached cautiously, her eyes never leaving the ghostly figure. She picked up the book, its cover worn and faded. Inside, she found drawings and notes in a child's handwriting. The entries detailed the girl's time in the hospital, her hopes of getting better, and her fears of the strange experiments conducted by Dr. Hargrove. Emily's heart ached as she read the final, desperate plea for help, scribbled on the last page. "I'll help you," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I promise." The girl's ghostly form seemed to flicker, a glimmer of hope crossing her face before she vanished once more. Emily knew she had to find out more about Dr. Hargrove and the experiments he had conducted. She left the pediatrics room, the weight of her promise pressing heavily on her shoulders. As she continued down the hallway, she noticed a faint light coming from a room at the end. Her curiosity piqued. She approached cautiously. The door was slightly ajar, and she could hear the faint hum of machinery from within. Pushing the door open, she found herself in an old laboratory. The room was filled with outdated medical equipment and files strewn about haphazardly. In the center of the room stood a large metal operating table, its surface stained and rusted with age. Emily's flashlight illuminated a set of cabinets along the wall. She began rifling through the files, hoping to find something that would explain the haunting and the mysterious deaths. After several minutes, she came across a thick folder labeled Project Lazarus. The folder contained detailed reports of unethical experiments conducted by Dr. Hargrove. The goal had been to cheat death, to bring patients back from the brink with a series of radical and dangerous procedures. The reports detailed the suffering of the patients, their gradual decline into madness and death. Emily felt a surge of anger and sadness as she read through the files. These patients had been treated as little more than guinea pigs, their lives cut short in the pursuit of a twisted dream. She understood now why their spirits were restless, trapped in a cycle of torment and despair. Determined to bring peace to the souls trapped in the hospital, Emily knew she had to find Dr. Hargrove's notes on how to undo the damage he had caused. She left the laboratory, her mind racing with plans on how to uncover the final pieces of the puzzle. As she stepped back into the hallway, she saw the young girl again. This time, the girl's expression was one of gratitude and hope. She pointed down the hall, guiding Emily toward the next piece of the mystery. Emily followed, her resolve stronger than ever. She would find the truth. She would help these lost souls find peace, and she would uncover the dark secrets that had haunted the hospital for decades. The young girl's ghostly figure led Emily down a narrow, dimly lit hallway, stopping in front of a set of heavy iron doors marked Ward C. The paint on the doors was chipped, revealing the rusted metal beneath. Emily's heart pounded as she approached, sensing the weight of the suffering that lay beyond. "Thank you," she whispered to the apparition. The girl gave a solemn nod before fading away into the darkness. Emily tried the door handle, but it was locked tight. She shone her flashlight around, searching for a way to open it. Near the base of the door, she noticed a small keyhole covered in dust. She knew she needed to find the key to unlock the secrets of Ward C. Retracing her steps, Emily headed back to the nurse's station, hoping to find a keyring or some clue that would lead her to the key. As she rummaged through the drawers and cabinets, she came across an old, rusted ring of keys, each one tagged with a worn, handwritten label. Holding the keyring, she felt a strange sense of urgency. She hurried back to Ward C, the keys jangling in her trembling hand. She tried several keys before finding the one that fit. With a heavy click, the lock disengaged, and she pushed the doors open. A cold, damp draft greeted her, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Emily stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness to reveal a long corridor lined with patient rooms. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, and the floor was littered with debris. As she walked down the hallway, she heard a faint banging noise, followed by muffled cries. The sound seemed to come from one of the rooms at the far end. Her pulse quickened, and she moved cautiously toward the source of the noise. She stopped in front of a door with a small, grated window. Peering through the grime-covered glass, she saw a shadowy figure thrashing against the restraints of a hospital bed. The cries grew louder, filled with desperation and pain. Emily pushed the door open, revealing a ghostly patient bound to the bed by heavy leather straps. The patient was a middle-aged man, his face contorted in agony. His translucent form shimmered, caught between the physical and the spectral. "Please help me," the man groaned, his voice echoing with the agony of his final moments. Emily approached slowly, her heart aching for the suffering spirit. "I'm here to help," she said softly. "Can you tell me what happened to you?" The man's eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "The doctor, he promised to cure us, but he lied. He experimented on us, drove us mad. We never escaped this place." Emily felt a surge of anger toward Dr. Hargrove. "I'm going to find a way to end this," she promised. "You won't be trapped here forever." The man's form flickered, his face softening with a glimmer of hope. "The doctor's office. Find his notes. They're hidden. They hold the key." With a final desperate look, the man faded away, leaving Emily alone in the room. Determined, she made her way back into the hallway and headed toward the administrative wing where Dr. Hargrove's office was located. She needed to find those notes and uncover the full extent of the doctor's twisted experiments. As she approached the office, the air grew colder, and she felt an oppressive presence weighing down on her. The door to the office was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered within. Emily pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was a stark contrast to the rest of the hospital. It was well preserved, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large wooden desk dominating the center of the room. Papers and medical files were scattered across the desk, alongside various jars filled with strange, preserved specimens. Emily's eyes were drawn to a large, leather-bound journal lying open on the desk. She picked it up and began to read, her hands trembling as she turned the pages. The journal detailed Dr. Hargrove's experiments, his obsession with conquering death, and the increasingly inhumane methods he employed. As she read, Emily felt a surge of nausea. The doctor's notes were filled with clinical descriptions of the patient's suffering, their gradual descent into madness, and their ultimate, painful deaths. The final entry spoke of a hidden room where the most secret and dangerous experiments had been conducted. Emily knew she had to find this hidden room. It was the key to understanding the full extent of Dr. Hargrove's crimes and finding a way to free the trapped souls. She carefully examined the office, searching for any clue that might lead her to the hidden chamber. Her eyes fell on a large, ornate bookcase. She moved closer and noticed scratch marks on the floor, as if the bookcase had been moved frequently. She pushed against it, and to her surprise, it swung open, revealing a dark passageway leading into the depths of the hospital. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped into the passageway, her flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. She descended a narrow staircase, each step echoing ominously. At the bottom, she found a heavy steel door, slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she entered a room that sent a chill down her spine. It was filled with old medical equipment, jars of preserved organs, and bizarre occult symbols etched into the walls. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, stained with dark, dried blood. Emily realized she had found the heart of Dr. Hargrove's twisted experiments. This was where the final truth lay, where the spirit's suffering had begun. She knew she had to uncover the secrets hidden here and put an end to the nightmare once and for all. Emily's heart raced as she stood in the hidden chamber, the weight of the room's horrific history pressing down on her. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the lingering aura of malevolent intent. She approached the stone altar, her flashlight revealing dark stains and grotesque carvings etched into its surface. Determined to find answers, Emily began searching through the piles of old medical files and notebooks scattered around the room. The yellowed pages were filled with dense medical jargon and detailed accounts of Dr. Hargrove's gruesome experiments. As she read, the full extent of his depravity became horrifyingly clear. The doctor had been obsessed with unlocking the secrets of life and death. He believed that by conducting radical and often inhumane procedures, he could discover a way to cheat mortality. His experiments involved the use of electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and various chemical concoctions designed to push the human body to its limits. Emily's hands trembled as she uncovered a series of personal journals, their leather covers worn and cracked. She opened one, its pages filled with Dr. Hargrove's increasingly erratic handwriting. The early entries were cold and clinical, describing the initial experiments with a detached curiosity. But as the pages progressed, the doctor's writing grew more frantic, his words betraying a descent into madness. One entry caught her eye, dated just a few weeks before the hospital wing was abandoned. I have discovered something extraordinary, something that defies all scientific understanding. The patients, though their bodies have perished, their souls linger. They are trapped between this world and the next, their suffering a testament to the power of my experiments. But I must find a way to harness this power, to control it. There is one patient, a young girl, who seems particularly attuned to the other side. She may hold the key to my ultimate success. Emily's blood ran cold. The young girl she had seen, the one whose spirit had guided her, had been central to Dr. Hargrove's final, desperate attempts to unlock the secrets of life and death. She felt a surge of determination. She had to find a way to free the spirits trapped by the doctor's twisted legacy. As she continued reading, she found a series of notes detailing a ritual designed to sever the ties between the physical and spiritual realms. The ritual involved specific symbols, incantations, and the use of certain objects that were kept in the hidden chamber. Emily realized that this ritual might be the key to freeing the trapped souls and ending the hauntings once and for all. She gathered the necessary items: a set of ancient-looking candles, a tarnished silver knife, and a book of incantations written in a language she didn't recognize. Her eyes scanned the pages, trying to make sense of the cryptic instructions. A sudden noise from behind startled her. She turned to see the ghostly figure of the young girl standing at the entrance to the chamber. The girl's eyes were filled with both hope and sorrow. Emily felt a pang of empathy and a renewed sense of purpose. "I think I know how to help you," Emily said softly. "But I need your help too." The girl nodded slowly, her form shimmering as she stepped closer. She pointed to a spot on the floor near the altar where a faint outline of a circle was etched into the stone. Emily understood. This was where the ritual needed to be performed. Working quickly, she arranged the candles around the circle and lit them, their flickering flames casting long shadows on the walls. She took the silver knife and, with a deep breath, made a small cut on her palm, letting a few drops of blood fall onto the altar. The air grew colder, and the room seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. Holding the book of incantations, Emily began to chant the unfamiliar words. The symbols on the altar glowed faintly, and she felt a strange pull, as if the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was thinning. The young girl stood by the altar, her eyes locked onto Emily's. As the final words of the incantation left Emily's lips, a powerful gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. For a moment there was silence. Then, a soft, almost musical hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense. The spirits of the patients appeared around the altar, their forms glowing with an ethereal light. They seemed to be drawn toward the circle, their expressions a mix of relief and joy. Emily watched in awe as the spirits began to dissipate, their energy swirling upward and vanishing into the ether. The young girl approached Emily, her form growing fainter. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing softly. "You've set us free." With that, the girl faded completely, leaving Emily alone in the now silent chamber. She felt a sense of profound peace wash over her, knowing that she had finally helped the trapped souls find rest. But as she turned to leave, a chilling thought crossed her mind. Dr. Hargrove's spirit was still out there, somewhere, and his obsession with conquering death might not have ended with his life. Emily knew her work was far from over, and the hospital's darkest secrets might still pose a threat. With the spirits of the patients freed, the abandoned wing of St. Mary's Hospital seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching her. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost oppressive. As she exited the hidden chamber, Emily felt the temperature drop suddenly. She shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her. The dark hallway seemed even more foreboding now, the shadows deeper and more menacing. She knew she had to stay vigilant. Dr. Hargrove's presence still lingered. As she made her way back to the nurse's station, the lights flickered erratically. Her flashlight's beam wavered, casting strange patterns on the walls. Emily's heart raced as she heard a low, guttural growl echo from somewhere in the darkness. The sound was unnatural, filled with malice and anger. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The growl grew louder, closer. Emily backed away, her flashlight sweeping the corridor frantically. Suddenly, a heavy crash sounded behind her, followed by the sound of glass shattering. She spun around to see a large metal cabinet had toppled over, its contents spilling onto the floor. A cold wind whipped through the hallway, extinguishing her flashlight. Emily fumbled with it, trying to get it to turn back on, but the darkness was impenetrable. She could feel a presence moving closer, the air around her growing colder by the second. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice shaking. A shape began to materialize in the darkness, a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, its form becoming more distinct. Emily's heart pounded as she recognized the twisted, malevolent features of Dr. Hargrove. "You think you can stop me?" the ghostly doctor hissed, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to seep into her very bones. "I have transcended death. You are nothing but a foolish girl meddling in things you cannot comprehend." Emily stood her ground, though her knees felt weak. "You tortured those patients. You caused unimaginable suffering. I won't let you continue." Dr. Hargrove laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "Their suffering was necessary for my work. You have freed their souls, but you cannot free yourself from me." The doctor lunged at her, his form shifting and flickering like a shadow caught in a storm. Emily ducked and ran, her pulse thundering in her ears. She needed to find a way to end this, to banish Dr. Hargrove's spirit once and for all. She remembered the incantation book and the ritual she had performed. There had to be something in there, some way to trap or destroy his spirit. She just needed to get back to the hidden chamber and find it. Dodging through the hallways, she felt the doctor's presence pursuing her, his anger palpable. Objects flew off shelves, doors slammed shut, and the air grew increasingly frigid. Emily reached the chamber, slamming the door behind her and wedging a chair under the handle. Breathless, she grabbed the book and flipped through its pages, her hands shaking. The doctor pounded on the door, his spectral form beginning to seep. The doctor's spectral form began to seep through the cracks around the door, a dark, malevolent mist creeping into the room. Emily's hands shook as she frantically flipped through the book, searching for anything that could help her banish Dr. Hargrove once and for all. Her eyes fell on a page detailing a binding ritual, a powerful incantation meant to trap a spirit and prevent it from causing further harm. The instructions were complicated, requiring a combination of symbols and items from the hidden chamber. Emily didn't have much time. The mist coalesced into Dr. Hargrove's ghastly form, his eyes glowing with hatred. "You cannot hide from me, girl," he snarled, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "I will make you suffer as they did." Emily set to work, her mind racing. She gathered the necessary items: a small vial of holy water, a piece of iron, and a shard of crystal. She arranged them around the stone altar in the specific pattern outlined in the book. The doctor's form grew more distinct, his presence oppressive. "Foolish girl, you think you can defeat me with ancient rites?" he taunted, moving closer. Ignoring his words, Emily took the silver knife and cut her palm again, letting her blood drip onto the altar. She chanted the incantation, her voice steady despite her fear. The symbols etched into the stone began to glow, a faint blue light emanating from them. Dr. Hargrove's form flickered, his expression twisting into one of rage. "No, this cannot be!" he roared, reaching out to grab her. Emily continued the chant, her voice growing louder and more confident. The room seemed to hum with energy, the air crackling with unseen power. The doctor's hand passed through her, unable to touch her as the protective circle she had created grew stronger. "You will not harm anyone else," Emily declared, finishing the incantation with a final emphatic word. The symbols on the altar flared brightly, and a blinding light filled the chamber. Dr. Hargrove's form was caught in the light, his spectral body writhing and contorting in agony. He let out a deafening scream, his form dissolving into the light, and then, just as suddenly, the room fell silent. Emily collapsed to her knees, exhausted but relieved. She had done it. The malevolent spirit of Dr. Hargrove was gone, bound by the ritual and unable to harm anyone ever again. She took a moment to catch her breath, the weight of the night's events settling on her. As she rose, she noticed something glinting in the corner of the room. Curiosity piqued, she approached and found a hidden compartment in the wall, partially revealed by the light from the ritual. Inside, she discovered a stack of journals and a small, ornate box. The journals contained more of Dr. Hargrove's notes, detailing his descent into madness and the extent of his experiments. Emily realized these would be crucial evidence to bring to the authorities to ensure the hospital's dark history was known and never repeated. She opened the ornate box and found a collection of old photographs and letters, revealing a more personal side of the doctor. Among them was a letter addressed to his wife, filled with regret and despair over the path he had chosen. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for the man who had lost himself to his obsessions. With the journals and the box in hand, Emily left the hidden chamber. As she walked through the now quiet and still hallways of the abandoned wing, she felt a sense of closure. The spirits were at peace, and Dr. Hargrove's dark legacy was finally laid to rest. But as she exited the abandoned wing and stepped into the dawn light breaking through the hospital windows, Emily knew that the experience had changed her forever. She had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger, determined to ensure that the suffering she had witnessed would never be forgotten. And so, with the first rays of morning light casting long shadows behind her, Emily made her way to the hospital's administrative office, ready to share the truth and start a new chapter in her life. Emily felt a mix of relief and determination as she exited the abandoned wing, clutching the journals and the ornate box tightly. The weight of the night's events bore heavily on her, but she knew her journey was far from over. There were still questions to be answered, and the spirit's torment needed to be addressed. In the hospital's administrative office, she found the head nurse, Mrs. Thompson, who looked up in surprise as Emily entered. "Emily, what happened to you?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her eyes widening at the sight of Emily's disheveled appearance and the ancient items she carried. "I need to talk to you," Emily said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "There's something you need to know about the abandoned wing and Dr. Hargrove." Mrs. Thompson listened intently as Emily recounted her harrowing experiences, the discovery of the hidden chamber, and the binding ritual that finally ended Dr. Hargrove's malevolent influence. She handed over the journals and the ornate box, explaining their significance. "This is incredible," Mrs. Thompson said, leafing through the old journals. "These documents, they confirm the rumors about the experiments. We need to take this to the authorities immediately." As they prepared to contact the police, Emily felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was a sense of familiarity, like an old memory resurfacing. She realized that she had never truly known her grandmother, who had been a patient in the very wing she had just explored. Her grandmother had died under mysterious circumstances, and Emily now understood that her death was connected to Dr. Hargrove's experiments. With the hospital's administration taking over the task of dealing with the authorities, Emily decided to visit the records room to learn more about her grandmother. The room was a cluttered maze of old files and patient records, but Emily's determination fueled her search. She finally found her grandmother's file, its yellowed pages filled with medical reports and handwritten notes. As she read through the documents, she discovered that her grandmother had been one of Dr. Hargrove's patients, subjected to the same brutal experiments that had claimed so many lives. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she read about her grandmother's suffering, her heart aching for the woman she had never truly known. The reports detailed how her grandmother had been a strong, resilient woman, fighting against the procedures that ultimately led to her demise. Among the documents, Emily found a letter addressed to her mother. It was written by her grandmother during her time in the hospital, filled with love and hope for the future. The letter spoke of her belief in Emily's potential and her hope that one day someone would uncover the truth about the hospital's dark past. Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. She felt a deep sense of connection to her grandmother and a renewed resolve to ensure that the suffering endured by her and the other patients would not be forgotten. As Emily left the records room, she knew that her journey was not just about confronting the hospital's dark history, but also about honoring her grandmother's memory. She walked through the now bustling hospital, feeling a sense of purpose and clarity she had never experienced before. She decided to visit the hospital chapel, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. The small, dimly lit room was a stark contrast to the chaos and horror she had faced in the abandoned wing. She knelt at the altar, the letter from her grandmother clutched in her hand. "Grandma, I hope you can hear me," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "I found out the truth. I did what I could to help those who suffered. I promise I'll continue to fight for justice and to make sure your story and the stories of all the patients are never forgotten." As she sat in the quiet of the chapel, Emily felt a profound sense of peace. She knew that her grandmother's spirit was at rest, and that the darkness that had plagued the hospital had finally been confronted. The journey had been long and harrowing, but it had also been transformative. Emily stood up, feeling a newfound strength and determination. There were still questions to be answered and stories to uncover, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead, armed with the knowledge and courage she had gained. As she walked out of the chapel and into the bright morning light, Emily knew that her story was just beginning. She had confronted the past and survived the horrors of the haunted hospital, and now she was ready to build a future where such suffering would never be repeated. Emily felt a sense of determination as she stepped out of the chapel, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unfinished. The hospital had returned to its usual bustle, but a shadow still lingered in her mind, the shadow of Dr. Hargrove and his unholy obsession with defeating death. The spirits of the patients might have found peace, but Emily knew that as long as Dr. Hargrove's malevolent spirit was loose, the danger was not truly over. Returning to the administrative office, she spoke with Mrs. Thompson and the hospital's board of directors. They had already contacted the authorities, and an investigation into the hospital's dark past was underway. The board members were visibly shaken by the revelations, and they assured Emily that they would do everything in their power to support her and uncover the full extent of Dr. Hargrove's crimes. But Emily knew that this wasn't enough. She had to ensure that Dr. Hargrove's spirit was permanently banished, and for that, she needed help. She remembered the incantation book and the ritual items she had used before, and she realized she needed a more powerful ritual to completely eradicate the evil that still lingered. Determined to find a way, Emily reached out to Father O'Reilly, the hospital's chaplain. He had always been kind to her, and she hoped he would believe her incredible story and offer his assistance. "Father O'Reilly," Emily said as she found him in his small office, "I need your help. I know this will sound unbelievable, but there is something evil in this hospital. Dr. Hargrove's spirit is still here, and I need to perform a more powerful ritual to banish him for good." The elderly priest listened intently, his eyes reflecting a deep concern. "I have sensed a dark presence here for some time, Emily. If what you say is true, then we must act quickly. I will assist you in any way I can." Together they returned to the hidden chamber. Father O'Reilly brought with him holy water, a crucifix, and a large leather-bound Bible. Emily gathered the ritual items, the incantation book, and the materials needed for the binding ritual. They prepared the chamber, creating a sacred circle with the holy items and setting up candles around the altar. As they worked, Emily felt the oppressive presence growing stronger. It was as if Dr. Hargrove knew they were preparing to banish him and was gathering his strength for one final confrontation. Father O'Reilly stood at the center of the circle, his voice steady as he began to recite prayers and blessings. Emily followed his lead, chanting the incantation from the book. The air grew thick with energy, and the candles flickered wildly. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. Dr. Hargrove's form appeared, more menacing and powerful than ever. His eyes blazed with fury, and his voice echoed with a terrible resonance. "You cannot destroy me!" he roared. "I have conquered death itself. You are nothing but insects, insignificant and weak." Emily and Father O'Reilly continued their chants, their voices growing louder and more insistent. The holy symbols around them began to glow, their light pushing back against the darkness. Dr. Hargrove's form flickered and wavered, his expression shifting from anger to desperation. "By the power of God and all that is holy, I command you to leave this place," Father O'Reilly shouted, holding the crucifix high. Emily joined in, her voice strong and unwavering. You have no power here, Dr. Hargrove. Your reign of terror ends now. The chamber shook, and a blinding light filled the space. Dr. Hargrove let out a deafening scream as his form began to disintegrate, torn apart by the combined power of the holy ritual and the incantation. "No!" he bellowed, his voice fading into nothingness as his spirit was finally banished. The light subsided, and the chamber fell silent. Emily and Father O'Reilly stood panting, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had done it. The malevolent spirit of Dr. Hargrove was gone, and the hospital was finally free from his dark influence. Emily felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The spirits of the patients were at rest, and the shadow that had loomed over the hospital for so long had been lifted. She turned to Father O'Reilly, who gave her a tired but triumphant smile. "Thank you, Father," Emily said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." "It is you who deserves the thanks, Emily," Father O'Reilly replied. "You had the courage to face the darkness and the strength to see it through. You have brought peace to this place." As they left the hidden chamber, Emily felt a sense of closure. She had confronted her fears, uncovered the truth about her grandmother, and put an end to Dr. Hargrove's reign of terror. The hospital would never be the same, but it could now move forward, free from the shadows of its past. Emily walked through the hospital's corridors, the morning light streaming through the windows. She knew that her journey was far from over. There were still stories to uncover, injustices to confront, and mysteries to solve. But for now, she could take solace in the knowledge that she had made a difference. As she stepped outside, the sun's warmth embraced her, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Emily Harris had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, armed with the courage and determination that had seen her through the haunted hospital's darkest hours.